In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a Yubinuki thimble using the tool from Gina-B Silkworks. Now, the tool is a acrylic tool. It's engraved with a series of lines. There's 16 lines going down the side, half of it. You also have a series of straight lines that do join up at the other end. I know this is difficult to see because of the way the lights are shining on it. And you have a diagonal and another straight line here. So the first thing that you need to do to create a Yubinuki thimble is you need to find bias fabric. So place the diagonal line of the tool along the straight grain of your fabric, and then simply draw. That is going to give you your 45-degree line for your bias cut. I know that the fabric is very bright, but I want the lines to be able to show up against it so that you can see what I'm doing. Because we're going to make a standard sort of sized Yubinuki thimble, the next thing that we need to do is, you'll see there are two lines on the right hand edge. Line up your bias line with the second one in, okay? And this, draw along the side. That gives you the width of fabric that you require for the lining of your thimble. So you can go ahead and, you know, make quite a few bias strips like this, and you'll just cut along it. So I'll cut those out. Cut one of these out for you so you can see, and I'm using small scissors to cut them out, but you'll get a much nicer finish if you actually use fabric scissors as opposed to embroidery scissors. So there's our bias strip. The next thing we need to do is cut a piece of card to line the thimble. Now for that, we will, I don't know why I just turned that around because it doesn't really matter. We will line up the first line on the right hand side along the edge of your piece of card, and there's a little notch at the top which also continues on from that line, so that you can cut quite a long piece. So there's your piece lined up. We'll cut that strip out now. How long a strip you use really will depend on the thickness of the card that you're using, bearing in mind you want it to be quite a flexible card so that it will roll around a column. And really how stiff you want the finished thimble to be. So we now have bias fabric and we have a piece of card. The next thing that we have to cut is a piece of facing. So I'm using a non-woven sew-in interfacing, a lightweight. Now you can use a lot of different things for this particular section. In Japan, you will find a lot of the really professional and good Yubinuki artists will actually use a very light paper, probably a washi paper, and they will do this slightly differently. They will cut a strip and place it before the padding. Other Japanese artists will use interfacing and place it after the padding. I use the after the padding method. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a straight line because I can see that my facing isn't very straight. And we're going to turn the ruler around now to see the one line on the left hand side and line that up with my line and draw along it so that I've got a thin strip of the facing. I'm going to cut that out as well. So there is our 3 main ingredients for the Yubinuki thimble. So we'll set the tool aside, especially because it's glaring on my lamps, and show you how to make the actual thimble. I have made a little tube mandrel, which is to the size that I want the thimble to be. The instructions that come with the tool, with our Yubinuki tool, do say how to make this mandrel. So the first thing that we need to do is cut a straight edge on the fabric. And we're going to turn the edge in and finger press that so it's quite sharp. Okay. Place the fabric onto the mandrel with the fold facing up. Wrap it around so that you have a nice overlap. Hold that in place. Bring the piece of card that you previously cut out, place it at the center of that fabric and roll that around. And here's where you can see about the thickness of your thimble. Secure that with a little bit of tape. Okay. Now the next thing to do is to fold down the edges of the fabric over the piece of card. Okay. I find using a little needle or even tweezers is helpful, especially if my nails aren't too long when I'm working on them. You can just bring it down and then work the other side, doing exactly the same thing. Folding it over. You'll see that's just flipped. I've caught that. There we go. So that's not super tight yet. That's all right, as long as it's folded over. Now you need to take needle and thread, and you need to tighten this up. I'm using black thread so that you can see what I'm doing. So the way that we're going to connect these is with a herringbone stitch. So we'll come up at one side, just skirt the surface. You're not going through the card, you're only going through the fabric, and then pull up, small stitch, and come back. And then each time you're pulling so that that fabric comes around the card. You may need to tweak it up. I've caught mine, so it's folded back down again. You see, if you're working these stitches back and forth, as you do this, it's pulling it up to make it a nice tight lining to your thimble. And it is important that this lining is as tight as you can make it, and go around a second time if you need to, it doesn't matter. Because it's on the bias, it's going to go around really nicely, and you will be able to stretch it somewhat to get a really good finish. When you're happy, you've come full circle, just go ahead and knot that thread and sink it in to hide it. Now, this is not going to show, so you don't have to worry about how tidy your stitches are. Now the next thing to do is to add a little bit of shape. Now in Japan, they tend to use a silk floss, which is basically silk that is from the cocoon, from broken cocoons, and it is a little, we would use it for spinning in this country. It's a little bit difficult to get hold of and a little bit difficult to use. So what I recommend, and the way that we show in our kit, is to use some thread. We're going to use an inexpensive white cotton embroidery thread. You can use a fine thread and build it up, but for our purposes this is just fine. And you'll need probably about 1 meter. Hold the thread in place and just wrap it around the thimble. And you'll see as I've wrapped there, I've caught the end. So you'll wrap it around the thimble, not going all the way to the edge. Okay, that's important. You just really want to wrap the center part. And then you'll need to build up a little bit in the middle, because what you want to do is you want to get a little bit of a rounded edge. Now how far you round this is entirely up to you. Now this filling, this is the part that I was speaking about before, that some Japanese makers will mark out their thimble and place a piece of paper underneath this filling for their marked edges. If you choose to do that, you'll need to use the larger strip, the one for the card, in order to actually see across the edges, unless you're using the silk floss. Right, we'll just tuck that end in. I'm using a tapestry needle to just tuck that end in underneath. And that's that. So we have padding on the thimble now. Okay. Now we get to our facing. Now with the facing, you need to mark it out according to your pattern. This tool is good for any traditional patterns that require up to 16 marks. You could do 18 if you want to go right to the edge. The space from either side is the same, but it's a little bit difficult perhaps to do that. So just show you, you see there's a series of lines. Okay, now what you need to do, the first thing to do, is to place the facing around the thimble. The place where it meets, you can just see through it, draw a straight line across. And we're going to trim off some of that excess because we don't need all of that. So you see we have a line just at one end. Now we need to mark out across this length the number of divisions required by the pattern. So let's say that we need 10 divisions. I tend to start at the edge and then I can count down. You can start wherever you want so long as you actually mark out, you know where you're going. So we'll start with the first line, and I will put my line up to the first line. And then if I need 10, I will count down, including the first line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that takes me here. So then I need to move this until the corner, the edge, comes onto the line 10. Make sure that your top one hasn't moved off the line, and then make a small mark on each of the lines coming down. So you can see if you're working a larger thimble, you may have to make that diagonal more shallow, and that will spread out those marks. Now we have to mark the other side. So I tend to leave my pencil in place on number 10 because I know I started on the first. Turn the facing around, place the top corner on the first one, place the line on the next one, and then again work make little marks, and you can see that the marks then line up. Now every so often you'll have gotten it a little wrong and they won't line up. That's fine, but only ever adjust one side. Redo your lines, adjust on one side. Once you have those dots, that is the basis for your pattern. Okay, so as I said, it depends on the pattern itself, what it is that you need to do. So again, I'm still going to use the black thread so that you can sort of see what I'm doing. Most Japanese instructions will say for you to mark the facing with arrows. You can start, I tend to start from here and work, and the arrows going to the right is usually how they will say to do this. And this is just so that you keep on track as you're working. Now I'm using quite a dark pencil just so that you can see what it is I'm doing. Place the facing onto the band, onto the thimble, joining the end to your line, and you can put a couple of stitches here to hold if you like. Some people will just decide to begin with using the Yubinuki right away and use the thread, their Yubinuki knot, which you can see in my other video. And the last thing to do will help you keep your track is to use, wherever you've started, use a different color pen. So for instance, if I'm going to start on this line, I'll mark a nice big dot with a red pen so that I always know that's the starting point. And there is your Yubinuki thimble measured out and ready to start doing your embroidery.